Good way to start the meeting.
It's a doc, yeah. I learned all about warnings when I see it, tell you, and I learned this certain sound.
All right, good morning. We are live. It is 9 a.m. Friday, September 6th. This is a Beach Preservation Ad Hoc Committee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that the press and public were duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. Douglas, thank you for doing multi-duty today, as usual. So today, committee wanted to review the, really the parameters that are driving the model, if you will, the healthy beach profile, frequency, erosion rates. A lot of that we're obviously leaning on Stephen Trainum for a lot of that information. Stephen could not be with us today, but we've got his presentation that you've seen before in the packet. We wanted to look at a timeline Douglas and Desiree have been working on over the last week or so, and then if we have time, continue our discussion on the emergency control measures. So Douglas, you want to just kind of take us through the first page, I guess, the recommendations, consideration, document dated July 12th, if you don't mind?
Yes, and I would just say, before we get too far into that, we did find, after the packet went out, we did have updates to this, so I'll point those out as we go through them, but you all had some comments at one of the reviews that aren't reflected in July 12th, so we'll go through those. The minimum healthy beach volume, this group agreed at 380 cubic yards per foot. And this is, and it's not a perfect 380, the two ends are skewed. And so we referenced figure 5 of Stephen's analysis that had those, that showed different amounts on the two ends, up to 600 cubic yards per foot at Breach Inlet.
And just for anyone playing at home, figure 5 is on page 7 of Stephen's document.
We kind of agreed on expected erosion rates for both ends. We agreed on 150,000 cubic yards per year for the north end and 70,000 cubic yards per year on the south end. These two were based just on, Stephen looked back in time, had a few years above that, had what we think were kind of an anomaly, a bit of an anomaly on the south end for the last 2 years. So kind of trying to take a best guess at what that rate would be, and this group landed on 70,000 cubic yards. That obviously drives the size of the project and the cadence of the project, so those are important going forward. Next consideration is the cadence of projects. This group agreed that the goal should be doing projects every 8 years. And I think at the last meeting, we talked about revisiting the possibility of looking at every 6 years. We can do that if that's the will of this group, but 8 is kind of what was agreed upon.
And I think, just for clarity, in the report, I think Steve ran his model on a 10-year cycle.
Yes.
Just so, yeah.
We do have 8
8,
as
yeah.
well.
I know we
Yeah,
got the 8
yeah.
too somewhere, but in the report, it's
Yeah.
still up to 10, yeah.
An addition here that we added, and I guess it kind of goes without saying that this group has considered this a recommendation, I think, since the beginning, but the added provision that when we do a project on either end, that it is a goal to do both ends at the same time. So we're not, staggered, and we're not doing this one year and then 3 years later doing this year's. So that's added into your recommendations.
And that
put it-
reduces the
Mobilization.
mobilization. That's a
Yeah.
$5 million per mobilization.
That's
yeah.
correct, yeah. Next one, recommend increasing the frequency of beach monitoring from annual to semi-annually. And this has actually been just awarded and done.
Look at
That
us.
happened to be.
There's one.
That happened to be up, that's a multi-year contract, that was up. So it was noted that was a recommendation of this group that was coming forward, so that one's kind of in the books already. Next two are triggers. And the goal here would be that, twice a year, we're getting these monitoring reports back from CSE, that we would be analyzing each of those reports to see if we've met one of these triggers. If we meet a trigger, the goal would be, or the objective would be, that sends the staff to council to explain, this group created this trigger for a reason, we're at that trigger. And then we'd come up with a plan of action for how to deal with the situation, either in a mid-scale size project or a large-scale project. What was agreed upon for a mid-scale project, so this would be sand recycling, shoal management, other kind of similar scale project, would be when beach monitoring forecasts show 1,500 linear feet of the area to be at or below the minimum healthy beach volume within the next 12 months.
So that's a little more than a quarter mile, basically.
Yeah, a quarter of a nautical mile.
Yeah. So not the entire stretch, so that's, we would look at it and we'd say, okay, we have a kind of a large hotspot developing.
That was just my understanding. So in conjunction with that, if we had that type of a trigger, then I guess in order to be ready for it if it occurred, we're gonna have permits being applied for so that we don't have the big delay, understanding.
I mean,
that
that's what that's what brings it to council. I mean,
Yes.
that's what these triggers are, right?
Yeah.
That is your question, Dan?
I think Dan is saying proactively have permits in hand.
Just so that, because if they expire, you can always apply again, but that way we don't have to start at the very beginning and
And-
have a year and a half, 2-year process. I don't know if it.
And I think we did, at least for the large scale, we talked about, and maybe this was more of an internal discussion than a discussion with this group, but when the chosen cadence, if the cadence is 8 years, we know a permit is good for 5 years. We've been talking about when would we try to have permits in hand? 5 years? So that would kind of cover that window between 5 and 10. 8 would be in, kind of squarely in the middle of that. But to your point, we will, kind of based on the chosen cadence, we will try to align the permits up as best we can to have, and again, I think we've said this time and time again, that our goal from the staff's perspective is we would hit a trigger, we would go to council, the money would be there, and the permits would be there. That's kind of the driving, that's, at the end of the day, that is the way we would like for this to work.
So should we
Everything-
document that as an assumption? It's a predicate that if we are in an emergency situation, even in these interims, the assumption is that the permit's at the ready. We're not going to have to spend another 3 or 4 months to get a permit. If we have 1,500 linear feet that are getting at risk, we don't want to have another long pole of 3 months during, say, a hurricane season to have to address it. Is that kind of where you were going, Dan?
It
Yeah.
is, and I'm thinking we can almost apply for it and set the parameters so that we're applying in advance for the permits with the understanding that we won't be executing on them unless it gets within that.
That's correct. That's our goal.
Okay.
But it's also my understanding that the permit has a specific,
Like-
whatever the procedure they're gonna run, if they're gonna put a shoal management or if they're gonna do scraping, it has to be specified in there, right?
That's
That-
correct.
The way they're gonna do it, which is why we said, hey, 12 months out, like if we project 12 months out, we're hitting this critical, it gives them, because they have to make an adjustment to that permit.
That's correct.
Because it can't be like, hey, we're using all of it. We're doing,
Right.
we're doing all these things at one time. It'll be this section with scraping, this section with shoal management, pulling that sand in, or dredge and pumping sand. Like they each have to be specified to meet that need.
That's correct.
Hey, Dan.
And that's part of the permitting conundrum, is we do have to.
It's not generic.
Yeah, it's not just a
Can we not
blanket.
map it out? Can we not have a permit which says, and says, if, under these circumstances, we'll do this, and under these circumstances, we'll do this? So that it's very straightforward, so there's nothing ambiguous about it, so that if we hit a certain mark,
I don't think so.
I think because it,
I think that, from what we see of the permit requests, they are primarily looking at the documented need.
Okay, got it.
That your sand volume has gotten to a critical level, okay, I don't think we could just say, hey, we're pretty confident 15 years from now, we'll need to do a project. They just wouldn't permit it in that way.
I meant, we apply for a permit, and we state that in the event that the sand volume gets below a certain amount, then we will have, then we're asking for authority to do scraping if these factors apply, or, shoal management if these factors apply.
If you-
So that, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
one more thing, so that we can So it's actually outlined out, so where, you pick A, B, C, depending on what the circumstances are. Obviously, there may be something else that's different, but it seems like you avoid the whole process if we can set different, almost triggers within the triggers.
Can,
Let me just say something real quick, because I think Dan's on to something, and I wonder if it's, I'm just going to say OCRM, because everybody knows what that is. I mean, I wonder if it's an OCRM upfront conversation, once we solidify all these triggers, all these data points to say, Matt Slagle, here's what we're doing, and here's how we're going to apply for permits. Can we just get some agreement up front? I mean, this is a change for them, but I think it's a good change that we could have all these triggers in place. I mean, I don't know, Douglas.
So
It just seems like it's
outline
worth
that
an
field, yeah.
upfront conversation with them to say,
the
here's
permits
our
I've,
plan.
what I was gonna say is the permits I've looked at all show an engineer specifying. So every time there is a professional engineer who has to sign off on the work. So they have to go through whatever that surveying process is and evaluate it specific to that task, if that makes sense. You can't have a generic professional engineer go, hey, I want to stamp a generic project. That's not how that's gonna work.
So let me, to answer this question, let me get Stephen's opinion on it. I know we've had this conversation, and I don't know, there are certain triggers in our permits already. That the shoal we're waiting on has to be within 400 feet of the shoreline before we can go get it. We can't, so we do have triggers. I think that his plans have to document, here's the shoal. These are the surveyed borders of the shoal. This is specifically the sand we're gonna get. And you can't do that work too far in advance or it's just too far out. So,
Dan's trying to bring some good logic into the
Yeah.
OCRM world.
but we'll see
But
how
it
we
doesn't
can,
always apply.
we can thread that needle of being proactive, but not being so far ahead of the curve that the permits are either expiring and not
generic,
used,
yeah.
or that OCRM says, that this is too nebulous, you don't have an actual sand source dialed into within the surveyed accuracy. So
thought.
it's a conversation with Stephen, and if he needs to touch base with OCRM, we'll have him do
Well, could
that.
you ramp up the monitoring of the beach? Make it more frequent so we have current data.
So we're doing that. That
Doing
was,
that. Just got that approved.
yeah,
Right.
we're going from once a year to twice a year, and that's been done. I don't think there would be any
can't do it
benefit to doing
quarterly or
even
anything?
more, I don't think there'd be much benefit to doing it more frequently than twice a year. So on the triggers, the other thing that this group had discussed, and I don't know that we exactly nailed down the distances, but we have a minimum healthy beach trigger. The other idea of this group was to have a minimum dune width. So similar idea where volume kind of is encompassing all that sand out onto the ocean floor. This group had the same idea of there just being a very simple kind of the width of the dune between the dune and the waterway. We had 75 feet in there. That came from your discussion at the time, but I don't know that. I think the idea was kind of just being bounced around. I think 75 was put in there as kind of a good generic placeholder, but I would suggest we refine that number, and we have a second set of triggers that would be based on that dune width.
And I guess get Stephen to opine on that. I don't know if he
Yeah,
was here.
yeah, he
probably.
was. He was, but I'll get him to.
But that's not
Kind
on,
of-
where is that on the sheet?
No, that's
Okay.
one of the red
I
lines.
think I think we ought to make sure that gets added.
Yeah, so I have that in the updated draft. You all don't have it, so we'll get that refined and get it onto you. And I would suggest that we also put this point about having permits at the ready. So I'll add that to each of those. There'll be a large scale permit that would need to be ready, and then a separate kind of mid-scale permits that would need to be ready.
Douglas, we got the B and the C and the B and the C. Are those, is somebody writing those?
Well, so that's, you
One's
all
the
are.
dune width, right? that we
Yeah,
just
dune
talked
width, having permits at the ready. So those are, we've added.
These are gonna
the-
be these are gonna be our triggers.
These are
Okay.
gonna be, yeah.
Okay.
And again, the goal with kind of all this is we're gonna work on it in kind of bullet format, and then eventually it will be
Have the living
more of kind of
document,
a, more of kind of a documented report, not
And
just
And
bullets.
this is kind of a quick sidebar. We talked at some point about getting either a consultant or a technical writer in here. I think Cindy, you were talking about this as well a long time ago. Would it be, I mean, is it something that would give you some help to do the actual crafting, or do you need that resource?
I don't
If you
think
don't
we
need it,
need
then
it.
you
Yeah,
don't.
I
I'm
don't
just-
think we,
yeah,
I mean, I
that's fine.
think,
Because some of your guts is, coming
Yeah.
from
In here,
Stephen
yeah.
for sure. And
Yeah.
it seems like what you'd
Just
wrap
feel like we're
around
writing a
this.
manual here is really
Yeah.
what we're writing.
Yeah, I mean,
Which
what
is a
you,
different skill set, yeah.
yeah,
What
we
you gonna-
might start with that,
Stephen.
Yeah.
But that's, and then I think what you wrap around it is
all these other,
triggers, timeline,
yeah,
becomes kind of a one.
yeah, that's
And
kind
I think
of,
Stephen's done a bulk of the work for
yeah,
us.
I mean,
most
that's
likely.
kind of the, and I think we will, yeah, kind of add to the front and back of that document, and that'll end up being the recommendation from this.
And I agree, and Scott, and that was brought up, and I still feel that may be something we do in the future, because I think that fell more into the larger education of the community and the state as we go and continue to look for funding sources and support for the funding that we, whether approved or not, or trying to get approval for. So I think in order to move this forward, we're in the right place.
So do we want to add 12 new recommendation, because I think we have talked about it either being like an economic development type, an economist type report. I think we've talked about it, being maybe a sales brochure. to kinda
Educational.
Educational.
Not sales. But I'll,
Aren't they the same, Bill?
Kind of. Depends on the receiver. At the state levels,
so I'll
that'd be
add,
critical.
in mine, that would be a number 12, to add a professional report.
And our lobbyists may be able to give us some guidance as we move to doing that too, as to what information they would find most
What might be missing.
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Douglas, for that, just so we don't lose it on this bullet, I think the intended audience is legislators, community.
Yeah.
It's an education point to Cindy's comment. Could be something easy to not do, but I think it's critical at some point.
Yep. Okay.
And Douglas, you're, on 6 and 7, the to be written, to Scott's point, you're replicating what we just talked about on both, whether it's mid-scale or large-scale.
Yeah,
right?
slightly different, the dune width, the trigger itself is slightly different. For a large-scale project, it's a more dire trigger. So that's kind of the leading edge, you're kind of, a part is a hotspot develops, that would be mid-scale. Large-scale would be the entire stretch, or we said 1 mile. So where the mid-scale is 1,500 linear feet, large scale is 1 mile. So, gonna add a dune width trigger, gonna add a bullet that we would have permits at hand on both. We're gonna add a new number 12 at the end about an educational report, kind of document. So, and then these last, I think it's on my page, it's 4 bullets. Those are kind of still the work to be done. Funding, I think that we had agreed to wait till Desiree was available to have that conversation. I think you all have kind of talked generally about the various buckets that are.
Sounds like we've got the list. We just kind of need to go back through that in glorious detail.
Yeah, I do think we've learned bad news on the special purpose tax district lever that I think we thought we had.
Yeah.
I think we've learned that we really don't have that. The other ones, I mean,
How did we find that out, or what was a?
so, and we're still, yeah, Charlton.
Charlton?
Charlton.
Yeah, he came
Charlton.
back and said we can't do that, or?
Yeah, he in kind of yes, that's, in short, he looked at the typical levers that other communities have used, and those levers are tied to a specific use, and it's generally water, sewer, roads, kind of infrastructure, and not beach. So he did say, it would be like add a comma and the word beach renourishment to the existing act, but it would be an
A
amendment.
legislative,
Yeah.
so
Legislative.
it's not available to us now, but the difference between us and North Carolina being able to do that is they have that comma and beaches.
That's correct. They
So-
have that, they kind of have that tool already.
So is that something we want to just put on our radar with and talk? I mean, again, we're looking at a 30-year horizon here. The avenues that are close to us today may be able to get opened in a decade or two to.
It seems like that would be something, and this pre-existed my coming on this committee, is it the beach management committee that's larger, that within the state? The group that gets together?
Beach advocates.
The beach advocates, that might be something that we present to them, because I would think other beach communities
Would want that.
with changes that are going on in our environment may very well want that, and it seems that that would be a good avenue to consider pursuing.
It's a great idea.
Agreed.
Yeah. Have the broader community behind it.
I'll also add that act, it does require participation by the owner. The owner has to agree to it. So,
Owner meaning resident owner.
yes,
Gotcha.
yes. So it's not a simple city council votes yea or nay, and it gets enacted. It's something that each owner would have to agree to. So seems like it
It's
would
not
be a
easy is what you're
challenge.
saying.
It seems like that would be a
But,
challenge,
yeah.
but, and I think Charlton said that, that could also, that's probably a harder amendment to get through the legislature to change that it requires the,
Is he going to
permission of
provide
the
us
owner.
with a page to tell us that, or, just kind of something we
Yeah.
have to tell us what it would take to get there? Or,
Yes.
yeah, that would be
Yeah,
helpful.
Yeah, we're working. We had some questions about other levers that he was silent on, so they're still working on that. But yeah, he's working towards giving us that.
Great.
So we're going to kind of hold what's number 8 on my list, funding discussion, and feedback from the lawyers for a future meeting. Community association, Mayor, I felt like there was.
I mean,
a
they
bit of a-
have the information needed, and again, their follow-up is to go have conversations in Columbia to see if they can get some commitment. If we do this, then is there a commitment of funding? So, I mean, I think they have what they need at this point.
I wanted to ask one question about that, because it seems like there's two different tracks, but maybe I'm mistaken. One is to get state funding, because they're an open beach, and the other one was the federal funding under the Army Corps of Engineers. Are they on board with that, with the Army Corps of Engineers separately?
Well, I mean, it's the same parameters, right?
Yes, yeah, we think
Access.
it will be that once you meet one, that they're considered free or they're accessible by both, public and accessible by both, state and federal. I would say that we have just had the letter that we sent that asked for the group to study the south end. We have just had a preliminary discussion with Nancy at the local office of if we wanted to add both ends, would that be, are we too late to do that? The initial response was no, that
Okay.
it's
You
still
could-
just sitting
you
with
could
them,
change.
that we could change it.
I
But
mean,
we
it's
need,
fiscal '27, so.
so we have a little bit
Seems
of
like we got a
time.
little time.
If we wanted to change that.
And I'm still not aware of any
And-
downside to doing that, because the worst that happens is it doesn't work, but at least if we got a $3 million, I remember they said it's $3 million, whether it's 2 blocks or 10 miles, so you
Yeah.
might as well do it all.
Yeah, and maybe we come back to this one in a future meeting, because I kind of, with you, Dan, it might be 2 tracks. I still think it would be helpful to get an official position from Wild Dunes, whether or not they're going to be willing to entertain And because what this does is this is going to have a significant impact to the overall modeling of where the money comes from over the next 30 years.
Even if the state says no, the Army Corps might say yes.
Yeah,
So-
or if Wild
Well, they
Dunes
use-
decides
that's-
that.
But to your question, they use the same guidelines.
Yeah. Right.
So if one says yes, the other one most likely going to say yes. So
But
I don't think there are two tracks
The other thing
here.
that concerned me was, I remember back when the Army Corps came, they said one of the requirements is that anybody impacted by it who's on the beach is going to have to sign an easement. And I know that was one of the concerns we had, is that going to be an issue? I think in Wild Dunes.
Already signed.
They've already signed a similar easement anyhow, but I think on the south side they haven't. But I don't know how we're going to deal with that, because we're going to make an endeavor and do the study, but then we've got to go and talk to all the homeowners, and maybe we should talk about that, because if we put the cart ahead of the horse and we do the plan on the south side and then somebody says no,
Yeah, we,
How do we
and
resolve
there are
that?
definitely communities caught in that
I mean,
conundrum.
Paulet
is
is right in the
Paulet is
middle
right
of
there
it.
where one
They
or
got
two
three
holdouts.
homeowners that,
but the other interesting
Signing.
part of it is that it's, and I don't know if there's a way to deal with it, but if that was something that the committee decided to go forward and this council decided to go forward with, is it something where it's, if you don't want to let us do it, you don't have to, but then, there's repercussions to you versus others because you're the impediment, and I don't know if that's something we can
you,
address.
you homeowner,
Well, only
individual
because
homeowner.
if it makes sense, if it all makes sense, and let's say there's one holdout who says, I'm not gonna do it, and it blocks the whole community from being able to move forward with it. I mean, I've heard stories, there was when they built the Roper Hospital, there was one guy that says, I'm not gonna sell my property. So they had to build around him to make it work. But it seems like we should, because otherwise you can do a whole lot of work and a whole lot of effort just to find that one person says no. And I don't,
Absolutely.
maybe the council, legal counsel can figure out some mechanism that we can deal with that if it happens.
Well, I think right now we're still, there's little that we can do other than at this moment in time, which is whether or not to amend this letter just to get our
little
holding
premature,
place. And
probably,
so I would be fully in support of, or would suggest that we amend the letter sooner than later, because I think amending it the other way is not going to be an issue. In 2 years, when they come forward and say, let's talk about the $3 million feasibility plan, and you say, well, this section of the island is no longer, they didn't meet the criteria, they've made a decision, or any other reason, then I don't think they're going to have a problem with us going that way. But I'd like to get us on a holding pattern so we don't lose the spot for the whole island.
So you're suggesting we go ahead and amend the letter and submit?
Unless they were to say that if we were to reduce it in the future, it would be a problem, but I just,
Yeah, we're on
Yeah,
track to do that.
the
There-
follow-up
that's
from
all.
last meeting was, again, we're trying to apply logic to the Army Corps to say, include the whole island, assuming this is going to be
that
opened
this is
up
going
for
to be,
public.
right.
Right.
And I don't know that they're going to
But
do
it
that,
sounded
but they
like that
might.
they were
Well-
okay with that.
Well, and
Yeah, I think at this stage, it's,
Because we're so
so
early.
it's kind
early.
of just kind of placeholding. I think
Yeah.
think my impression was they're going to be fine with
If
that.
they're fine,
And
I'd
then-
like to get in the queue for the whole
Yeah.
island and protect everyone. I would hate to come back and find out that we get stuck because a year from now it's locked in the way it is or something, or we get busy with this bigger project and forget to amend it.
I agree, and maybe I got ahead of myself,
And-
because the reality is that to go to the homeowners, you've got to tell them what the plan is, and part of the plan is going to be, I'm sure.
Got no plan.
Some
Yeah.
literature that talks about, the reasonableness of what they're going to do and how they're going to do it, and some of the parameters, so that people are comfortable it's not going to impact them negatively, which I'm assuming generally people are comfortable with that when the plan's done, because they're doing it all over the country.
And I think that they'll be, within this time period, we will be better situated to present it to everyone right now, and then see what the feedback or the temperature is. There's a lot between now and 2 years from now that's got to be done that could convince
Or 3,
people that
yeah.
this is the best thing, or it may not be. We may have this who knows? But the point is this
Yeah.
is
Maybe
Kinda
the state
ahead of
and
team.
I
counties will
don't
step up.
want to miss being in the queue.
So
I think
I just
we got
want
that.
to, well, I just want to understand what the deliverable is, and maybe we add it to the project plan here, is that we're recommending that we amend the letter now to include the entire island. Is that what I think
That
that's
we
what I'm
have,
hearing.
except for the part, like the county, or that we have no.
Yeah, we're On
For the
track
whole
to do
island.
that,
Yeah.
yes.
But for,
We-
like, when do we think we're, because we got now
We're
to 27, are we talking about doing it now, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're trying to set a meeting just to talk about, if there's any con to it, what we'd need to do to revise the letter. So we're kind of having just a meeting about the process, assuming that there's no downside from their perspective. We're on track to amend that letter. If there is some downside, if they say, hey, you may not want to do it because
We don't
for
have a
X, Y, and Z,
buy-in, or, yeah.
that we're going to get that information and report it back. But if we suspect that they're going to say, it's just a placeholder, amend the letter, it's no problem, and if that's the case, we'll just do that.
Or they say it needs to be two letters separate, the south end and the north end. I think it's just good to know how to best to get in the queue. And we'll have time between now and we have to make major decisions.
Yeah, and then I think at the same time, the track is, the community association is
Doing
going
their
to
due
have,
diligence.
doing their due diligence and trying to get some commitment at the state level.
Which is
Which would
awesome.
feed to the federal level. So we might want to, go ahead, Douglas.
Just to back up to the
Yep.
funding mechanism, and I know we haven't had that conversation, but we do think that, and I'll just add kind of a placeholder for a bullet about lobbying for amendments to the South Carolina code to allow beach renourishment. The group agreed to that, correct?
Yeah, I think we got to pursue all avenues for
All
the
avenues.
long term, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, I think there's multiple pieces there. What we launched our lobbyist on last council meeting was getting some kind of dedicated funding source. If you're not going to get a dedicated funding source, then give us some tools to enact at the local level and/or ATAX, or our 30% number on ATAX. Can we look at capping that or broadening the use or,
And that gets into that number 8 discussion.
yeah,
Phil?
yes, just,
That's all going to be number 8.
yeah. I mean, if the
And
state's not going
attachment
to.
2s and 3 isn't in the packet,
Yeah,
right?
that's correct.
2, 3,
Yeah,
4,
this was
5,
pulled out of a
in case
prior
anybody's
pack.
looking for it.
Yeah, pulled out of a prior
Which I
package.
was. Yeah, Scott, I think we try and capture everything under that bullet, Douglas, on
Yep.
what we launched our lobbyist on, just so
Some-
we can have a full picture.
Got it. Wild Dunes is going, their Army Corps project, we've talked about that. Kind of haven't fully
Haven't fully
vetted
vetted,
the
I
pros
don't
and
think,
cons,
yeah.
but we at least know that we want to revise request to include both ends. So we'll say, right now, the bullet is pros and cons of the south end becoming, so we're going to strike that in a minute to be both ends. And we'll continue to work on that one. And then we have the work that we kind of started on last week, I don't know, was that last week? On emergency response strategies. So we have in the packet there, if we get to it, kind of starting points on that one. The other thing, everybody good with, was going to go over just kind of timeline, if everybody's good with
Yeah.
where we're kind of heading on that?
I just have one question.
Yeah.
Did we, on number 4, are we landing on a 6 or an 8, or are we still in the?
I have it
are we
as
still-
8, but that
okay.
we're going to provide information on what a 6 would do.
Okey-doke. Okay. Thank you.
Add a whole lot of money. How about that?
Yeah.
That's what it would do.
I think so, too.
I mean,
We're,
a whole lot of
we're
money.
stretching for 8, I can tell you that with the finances, but we'll see what 6 does.
Well, didn't 8 was close to 10 because of the volume of sand went down,
Yeah, there
as I
was.
recall.
Yeah.
That was
Correct.
close. That was within a
Yeah.
couple of $1 million over the 30-year
Yeah,
period.
each time, I mean, the volume of sand, and I guess, and I think philosophically, when we think about this cadence being kind of increased, we have to keep in mind that what Stephen's doing is each time we shorten the cadence, he is lessening the amount of sand that's built into that project. So if the cadence is 60%, he reduces the sand by 40% to get to 60%. So I think it's easy to kind of get it in your mind that we're adding a ton of sand more frequently, but really what it's doing is it's adding the amount of sand that you would be expected to be at after 2 years of erosion from a 10-year storm.
Yeah.
So kind of keep that in the back of your mind that, because I've heard that kind of misconception that if we're dumping the same amount of sand that we did this last time, but we're doing it now every 8 years, that would be so much sand, surely we'd never have a problem. But that's not how the program is laid out.
And also you're reducing it by the, whatever emergency relief we're doing.
Along
And
the
my
way.
concern is that, I like 8, I'd rather it be 10 if we could, but I think from everything I've heard from the people we've talked to, it seems like, 8 is the conservative approach, or the, not the conservative approach, 8 is the ideal approach, but maybe it's 6, and maybe we come up with an idea somewhere between those, depending on what happens, and it's an evaluation of what the costs are and the expenses, but I understand the cost of that. I'd rather figure it out and then make a decision than not figure it out and just assume 8 is the right number.
All right, so we'll provide, and that will be, that could easily, primarily, that's a financial consideration. So when you're kind of,
Yeah, I
when we're
think the
back
math-
to the financing
Yeah, the math is
component.
just basically if you reduce 5 million in sand, you can finance an extra deployment. I mean, really, it's what it is.
Right, but we need to be cautious of saying it's just a and I'm not trying to be, it's just, the finances that we are looking at in the plan are very finite. There's larger finances that go outside the plan if we
Right.
go too long, such as damage to the beach, excesses, all, so that's where,
Other
we just need to be careful, but 8 years seems to be a good number, and the math was in our favor compared to 10, as it wasn't such a big stretch to do that. 6, we'll just have to see the numbers, obviously.
And the last point is that, and I keep going back to North Carolina, what they said, which was that when they did their funding, they had this large window. And so they bargained for it in advance. They had this 13-month period or year-and-a-half period, and they saved, $13 million. And we've always seemed to react as opposed to being proactive, just because of the way it's worked. And I know it's only gone a few cycles. But I'm wondering if there are, solid companies that are reputable, that have been around for long enough that we can contract with and give them a window and get set prices in advance and maybe get a discount because of it.
Certainly ask that question.
Yeah.
Dredging contractors appears to me to be very much the Wild West. That it is, like, where they have a dredge at that time, and how, and it seems to swing pretty wildly. When we look at the cost per cubic yard of other projects that are seemingly very similar to our project, we just see huge differences in cost per cubic yard, which
Yeah,
to me doesn't make a lot of sense.
I'm just wondering if as the beach problems are becoming more and more present throughout the country and the East Coast in particular, if you almost don't get in a kind of a routine maintenance program where you've got different communities and we all, I know it's hard to connect with them all, but we all connect so that the dredging company knows it's just in a cycle. And they're gonna make plenty of money in that cycle, but I'm not sure if we've evolved to that point yet.
So maybe a recommendation, we've talked a little bit about this, but, the idea of coordinating our two ends, maybe a broader coordination of, if we choose 8 years, but at 6.5 years, we happen to know that the dredge is in Myrtle Beach, that we could start kind of a regional coordination to hopefully reduce down the cost of so maybe that could be a consideration of some level of coordination on a regional.
It's most likely going to be the coordination with the Army Corps, given how many beaches are federally managed
Yeah,
in South Carolina.
kind of they happen to be at Folly.
Yeah.
Could we have been in a position where, okay, they're right there, we're planned for a year and a half away, let's go ahead and see if we get a favorable price.
We got
because
a
they-
dredge company right there.
Yeah, yeah.
We can't
Well-
get sand on the beach.
I would suggest that once we get this packaged and approved, that, I know your time's valuable, so at a time when you can, that you reach out to North Carolina, I think it was Robert or whoever's, they have a full-time employee, I think he said now, and find out how they've actually been able to orchestrate having those contracts 2 years early. They may have some advice to go along with this too, since they're in the process of having done it and made it work and saving significant amounts of money. So I just think that that would be a good resource, because clearly they face some of the same same issues with competition, time, and the Wild West, it sounds like. So on the time frame, that's, and what needs to be approved. So, perfect, I'm
Yeah.
ready.
We're ready to go
If
to
you
that?
guys
Yeah,
are
let me ask just one
ready-
question real quick. On
Yes.
number 10, 'cause
Yes.
we have not done much on the pros and cons about the Army Corps project. I don't know if it's whether it's this committee or council at some point or, I mean, I'd love to hear from Folly and Edisto Island and Pawleys. All those are federally managed beach, some of them brand new, like Edisto. I mean, I'd just love to hear what they went through from a thought process standpoint. Has it been good, bad, or indifferent? Just what
Let's
their
get them in.
experience
I
has
think
been.
that's, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if
Again,
we
whether
could
it's
even get
here
a
or
Teams
council.
meeting, or do a Teams meet,
Yeah.
get a Teams meeting set up for Friday at 9 o'clock with 2 or 3 of those individuals to at
That'd be the
least.
administrators or Mayor Goodwin or, you know, people
Either-
like that.
either
yeah.
or both,
Or
yeah.
both, yeah. I mean, they've been living and breathing it for a while now.
Folly, yeah, definitely.
Maybe
Like I
that's,
say,
I
yeah,
bet-
Pawleys a good one because
Sick,
they're
yeah.
battling this one or two homeowner left, and it'd just be interesting to hear their experience at some
I'd
point,
like
I
to hear
think.
them here, if that's possible, yeah. Wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great to have them here. It just, if
Yeah.
that's not the possible, did you get them on a
Okay.
good, solid Teams meeting, at least start the conversation?
Yeah.
All right, Douglas.
So
sorry.
Yeah.
you want to try to do a funding
Funding
talk
next, I think.
next, and then after that, an Army Corps?
Yeah, because funding's more pressing than Army
Okay.
Corps is.
So 2 meetings away. All right.
And can we, for the, in preparation for the funding, I think it would be helpful to have a page of, and I know they might move, but what are the assumptions? What are the assumptions for the funding? So, you know, what do we have with a tax contribution? You know, we've got our current funding, and then we can start overlaying. You know, I think one of the big things that we're gonna have to talk about is, hey, what's the minimum amount of funds that we want it to go to? Are we gonna let the fund go to 0, or are we gonna have it at 2 million or 5 million? Are we going to, you know, what's the assumption with the tax contribution with Wild Dunes? Is it gonna be the current 25? Are we gonna go to 50 based on contribution? I think we've got to discuss the, you know, all the, you know, I don't know that we've got written triggers now as to when the Beach Nourishment Fund is used versus the Wild Dunes Fund. I know that there's some, maybe some handshake agreements, but I don't know if there's anything documented. All these assumptions and the inflation and frequency are all going to really determine, you know, we've said it's somewhere between 3 and 4 a year that we've got to raise. But pulling those levers one way or another could have a significant impact on where we go with that. I think it would be really helpful for us to, and before we jump into sources of funding, we got to know what our levers are and confirm them. Otherwise, you know, if one lever's off by 25 or 50%, we've got a big difference in what we're going to need. So
maybe-
that would be helpful.
Yeah, maybe when we look at the funding next week or whenever we do it, I mean, the model's really done from
Yeah,
David Cheatwood.
and it
I mean,
has
we
those
could
built-in assumptions.
put that up
Those
live
levers,
and
Yeah.
and
tweak
start
it.
pulling the
Yeah.
We
levers.
should definitely spend time
Yeah.
on, because that, to your point, I
Yeah.
mean, a tweak.
Big piece, yeah.
A tweak in those numbers of the assumptions, especially when you know, it's pushing out 30 years. So the end result 30 years down the road of a minor adjustment is pretty.
It's big.
Pretty big. So we'll have that dashboard with all the assumptions.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Timing, we ready to talk about?
Yeah,
Timing?
sorry.
And we have just kind of worked on an outline really of kind of all aspects of beach nourishment. So we're putting this group's kind of benchmarks in there at the early end. But then we thought it would be helpful to try to look at it through, kind of getting to the first major offshore program, actual project. So we're going out to 2027, but we're starting with this group, and we have set a deadline for your recommendations to be finalized by the end of the calendar year. Kind of all of these bullets we've gone through. And then we set kind of within that overall recommendation, we have 5, we've kind of broken down your tasks to setting the minimum minimum healthy beach profile, which you started months ago. We're going to put that as finished, if you all are okay with it as of this meeting. Can obviously always revisit that if something comes up. Frequency, cadence of large-scale projects, sounds like you want to look, we had that as being 8 years and set, but if you want to look at 6, changing it to 6, we can push that finish line out a couple of weeks. Sounds like you want to do that?
I don't.
Yeah.
I'd
guess
leave
so,
it at
yeah.
8, but that's just me.
Yeah, no, I'm okay with 8 too, but it sounds like we want to look at the,
See what it would,
see
the
what it
effect
looks
would
like,
be.
yeah, before we finalize it.
New funding, so the next task on your, is to analyze the kind of assumptions, the levers that you have, and detail out some recommendations on funding. We're establishing a deadline for that of 9/20.
Are we going to talk
So-
about, are we going to talk about it next week? Are we going to meet the 13th or the?
If that
Talk about
works,
it,
yeah, I think that
I
was.
can't
a-
be here, but that's
You
fine.
cannot?
Y'all can keep rocking, yeah.
So I think we had 2 meetings, so I think we were assuming that we would meet
2 more
this
Fridays
Friday.
coming
I'm sorry, next Friday, and the finalized recommendation the Friday after.
Okay, that sounds good.
The emergency protocols, we have that recommendation getting finalized the following Friday, 10/4. Along with the Army Corps recommendations also on 10/4.
Do we want to push that out, Bill?
That
You
one
think if we're going to have
probably,
if we're going to
Yeah,
have a,
we're gonna
some
try to
guest
pull
speakers?
somebody
Yeah.
in.
So I'll add 2 weeks to that one on the Army Corps, pros and cons. And then that has us, after you kind of develop all these recommendations, it has you finalizing them at the end of December and then generating a report into January to council. And then, I mean, we can go over the rest of these, but they were kind of more of an internal,
For the project.
for the staff, for all the projects and kind of next steps.
Do we need to change number 9 now if we're looking at for the whole island?
Mm-hmm,
Just the title of 9?
yeah.
I'll just strike South End.
Same thing on 10, 11.
Well, 9 is specifically
Oh.
the ongoing project. 9 is the South End.
Oh, the beneficial
That's the
use.
dune, you're pushing up the sand to the dune kind of thing?
Yes, yeah, that's the work that's currently underway. And 10 is
Yeah,
the,
it's-
Might need to
Nine's-
change the dates on that one a little bit. On number 10,
Mayor O'Neill said it's perpetually next week.
yes.
It's coming.
well, we did,
Yeah.
we do actually have bids, but
Oh, we got the bidding.
we have
Okay,
the bids for
okay.
that,
Oh,
so
sorry.
that's,
Yeah.
that is, but we are, I think we're gonna rebid it. Yeah, 10 is actually done.
I still think next week we'll look at the financial model. Scott, to your question, that's really done. Can, on the fly, change those assumptions. Go ahead, Douglas, sorry.
So keep going on
Okay,
that.
so next
Financials,
week-
so we're gonna have the assumptions, we're gonna have the
Think we'll
page of
have
kind
the
of
model.
levers.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? We have that kind of document of levers. We're gonna have something finalized from the attorneys on the special tax district, kind of have that completely flushed out. Anything else for that meeting?
I think the handful of ideas that we had
Yeah.
around funding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Laundry
So the
list, and
levers-
even if it's a range of what we've got for potentials, you know, what would be the range of, I think we listed over a dozen opportunities.
Yes.
And we may say, you know what, this one's today, this one's 10 years, this one's, but if we can quantify,
Yeah, we are waiting. We've asked our parking management group who does, kind of island-wide paid parking and Folly, to generate some estimates of revenue that they would expect, if we were to open parking up. So we're kind of working on those estimates of revenue for each of the levers in your list, working on a revenue for each lever that we can So that'll be included in that.
Yeah, I think
Next
we
week.
start with the model next week. I mean, we can get to a lot of it next week, it sounds like, but start with the model and the assumptions and just, if we want to make changes and put it on the screen and
Yeah.
just lets people see how it's working.
Yeah, so
I
the
think it'd be a
model and
good
the
spot to start.
preliminary list,
Yeah.
those would be two, that'll fill the day.
Yeah.
So on the timeline and deliverables, and this is pretty much to you, Philip, and Scott as council members, what I don't want to, what I hope we can do is get things in front of council in a way that we don't miss the ability and for everyone to have time to research it or ask questions and make a decision that they can put into the budget as there's going to be, or whether it's a budgetary change, a shift in the budget, discussion about bonds, discussion. And so I think that knowing what our generic deliverables should be when, in other words, should we be presenting the plan to them sooner so they can digest that and then come back to them with financials at a subsequent meeting with enough time that if there's follow-up that they request. Again, I'm just
Chime in,
very
Philip, if
cognizant,
I'm-
I don't want to miss
if
the
I'm off
time
base, I
frame
think
to
if we got
say
to-
we want
I'm
to
sorry.
raise a tax. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if we've got till the end of the year, and I think, Philip, you said this at the last meeting, our budget cycle's January to June. That should give us enough time to, if we get it done by the end of the year, or, yeah, those. to
We
present.
should be in a good spot.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I do have pretty large concern about dumping this on council in January, but I think we can give the overall plan in January, come back with something else in February if we need to, come back with something, because at the same time, we'll be having budget workshops, March, April kind of timeframe. So I think we'll be okay. If we can hit January to at least get the update on what this committee's been working on for 8-9 months at that point, I think we'll be fine.
Should we have maybe a socialization update in November or something, just so that with some of the committee members maybe that would be a good idea for council, get it on the November
Yeah.
calendar. And that way it's not then they can anticipate that they're going to get that information in January, and if they need anything in advance, we can get it. That way,
I would just-
rather than just dump, yeah, I'm with you on that.
I'm
Well,
just,
and we've
again,
had-
I'm concerned, we've had the 9 months of
Yeah.
meetings and conversations and education, and some of them haven't had the benefit of that, and I just don't want our work to get pushed off, shame on us, that we didn't get them what they could use to digest and ask questions on soon enough. That's all that, and again, I have to defer to you because you know your
Yeah.
colleagues best.
Well, and we've got
And your
another
schedule, and
committee,
your schedule of other things.
we've got another committee that's been going for 7 or 8 months too, and Douglas and Desiree and I have been having this conversation, should we be dripping on council on what's happening? Because that other committee's covering a whole lot of ground as well too, and I do have concern about information overload, so,
And the comp plan update.
and
We
the
got-
comp
we got
plan update,
Three,
some heavy,
Well, this one's
Kind of-
pretty, to me, this is, yeah. this is
they're all
pretty-
important.
They are, but, yeah, I would suggest that we maybe put on the timeline a November council update if we can get that on the calendar.
so kind of yeah.
Just
an
even if it's
introduction-
yeah,
an
even if it's a
introduction in November.
30-minute, 20-minute, whatever,
Yeah.
but I think we got to get that I think we should get kind of an update in front of them and let some of the committee members come and talk about what's been going on.
All right. That's under an hour. Do you want to get into
So let's just confirm. So we're-
emergency stuff, or you want to?
Next Friday, right, 9 o'clock. So it's the 13th, everybody's good. Actually, I can't be here, but y'all can rock it on. And then the 20th, we'll also do one at 9 o'clock. Based on your timeline, Douglas.
Yep.
With Elizabeth not being on the committee or as a council person anymore, does the council want to ask one of the other members to be part of this as we move forward, or?
I mean, Katie's on here, I think.
Okay,
three's
I'm
enough, yeah.
just, it's something that thought I should ask.
I think somebody jumping in now, what do you think?
Oh,
Tony?
boy.
Okay, it's fine, I
Yeah.
just,
Yeah,
Good question, but mm-mm.
although we might, yeah.
So everybody's good for the next 2 weeks, 13th,
Yes.
20th? I would personally vote to adjourn, but if people want to get into the
I'm okay with that.
emergency, that's
Yeah, I
fine.
think-
I've got
That's
court,
enough.
so I've got to go.
It's enough for
See you.
today.
Friday morning?
Motion to adjourn.
It's 9:55. Douglas, you'll take us off record before.
good for today.
It's gonna take me a moment.
Yeah.
Still thinking we should get one of those mugs, but.
put the mug,
You want the mug, I'll give you a hug.